1,000 metres underground at the time, have now been rescued. It's 20 years since a fire which began on a wooden escalator ripped through King's Cross Underground Station in London. The blaze killed 31 people and injured another 60. Since then, new safety measures have been put into place, but the man who chaired the public inquiry into the disaster says some lessons have still to be learned.
King's Cross Station 20 years ago. It's the worst fire in London Underground's history. It started with a lit match dropped on a wooden escalator. It ended with 31 people dead. Sophie Tarasenko lost her brother Ivan in the fire. He was just 25.
We still think of him every day, we still miss him. And the sad part about each year going by and realising it was 20 years ago, it really just means we haven't seen him for 20 years, which is kind of really sad still now.
On the night of the fire, the emergency services faced a chaotic scene. One of their many problems, there was no way to communicate with staff underground. Peter Power was one of the police inspectors in charge.
We had to send people running to the other command vehicles to get information back. We had to coordinate in a way that my father would have been familiar with in the Second World War.
In the inquiry that followed, 157 recommendations were made. Smoking was banned and wooden escalators replaced. But 20 years on, some lessons have yet to be learned. That still, there is no communication system in place.
If the Americans can communicate with a man on the moon, then it seems extraordinary that the Brits can't establish a system which will get a system going down to people 20 yards beneath the surface.
The suicide bombings of July the 7th, 2005. Again, passengers at King's Cross died, and again, emergency services had no way of talking to each other underground. For Sophie Tarasenko, progress has been painfully slow.
I thought that it was one of the first things that would be put right after the King's Cross fire. It never happened. I'm told that it's still not going to happen, for some time to come, and I find that unbelievable.
The government says it's spending £1 billion to update fire service equipment, and a digital radio system should be in place by the end of next year. Graham Satchell, BBC News.
Well, with me now is the BBC journalist Clifford Thompson, also a former Red Watch firefighter. Clifford, thanks for coming in.
Tim.
What are your memories of that day?
Well, I was on duty with Red Watch colleagues in Stratford in East London. We didn't actually attend the call, but we heard over the radio that a major incident had been declared. And of course, that's always very serious news when it happens. And gradually the incident escalated. I think there were about 150, 200 firefighters called on. We were kept very firmly in our station. But then, unfortunately, we heard the tragic news that Station Officer Townsley had, in fact, lost his life.
And I think, subsequently, you formed part of the Guard of Honour, didn't you, for,
That's right,
for his
Tim,
funeral?
Yeah, we were actually posted right outside King's Cross Station, which was a very moving experience. There were thousands of firefighters from all over the UK and other parts of Europe as well, which was really surprising.
Interesting that 20 years on, the fire service still hasn't got radios which work underground. British Transport Police, I think, does have it. Why has it taken so long? Well,
the fire service is investing in a brand new system. It's building it from the ground up. It's called Firelink, and we think that will be ready by about 2009. Firelink will be able to patch into the other emergency services, so they'll each be able to talk to each other, and eventually that system will be able to tap into the system underground that's being separately provided by London Underground.
But isn't there anger within the fire service that it's taken 20 years, 21 years for this to happen?
Fennell made 157 separate recommendations, and he was scathing about communication, the way the emergency services worked, the way that London Underground worked. And there have actually been lots of practical changes that have happened now. For example, plans to all the tunnel networks are kept outside the stations. At King's Cross, they were kept deep underground, of course, completely in the wrong place.
And when you look at the actual equipment in terms of Kevlar and fire protection, I mean, that has changed radically, hasn't it, as a result of the King's Cross?
Yeah, the changes to personal protective equipment came around pretty quickly after King's Cross. We used to wear what were known as affectionately as boil-in-the-bag leggings or over-trousers. They're basically rubberised, something that would be more suitable for when you go sailing. And in fact, that was replaced with padded equipment. Since then, Kevlar helmets came in, and some fire and rescue services are now using the Cromwell-style helmet where the ears are completely enclosed as well.
Is there a lot more that still needs to be done, do you think, for the fire service?
Well, the government's investing a huge amount of money in fire and rescue services in the UK. There's a scheme underway called the New Dimension Programme. So far, it's already invested £56 million, and that's providing valuable urban search and rescue equipment. And it's this USAR, so-called USAR equipment, that was used recently. It's been used in the summer during the flooding with high-volume pumps, and it was also, unfortunately, used at Warwickshire to recover the bodies of the 3 firefighters there. That was nationally pooled resources that came from five fire services.
And obviously so much has changed in 20 years, because I remember covering this as a newspaper journalist at the time, and we didn't even have mobile phones then, did we?
Exactly. I mean, it was we were using sort of field telephones that plugged into cables and all sorts of bits of kit that just didn't really work together. There was no synergy with the equipment, and also the way the emergency services worked with each other has improved a hell of a lot. That came about very soon after.
Clifford, thanks very much for coming in to talk us about that today, 20 years ago. There's more on the King's Cross disaster and how it has changed the way firefighters work on the BBC News website. In fact, also a piece by Clifford about his memories of that day. Right, time to catch up with some weather news now. Rob McKelway's got the details. Rob.
Afternoon. It's rather hard to ignore the fact it's November. Cold, wet and windy for many today in England and Wales at least, with some snow on the hills. Surprisingly, Scotland and Northern Ireland have done rather better. But for central England, specifically the West Midlands, the eastern side of Wales, and then down to the south coast of England, Hampshire, there's a Met Office warning of severe weather, that heavy rain. Now, this evening that might well turn to snow for a while, even at low levels. It's not going to lie, it's not going to be a great deal of trouble. It'll be no